It's showtime, folks. Showtime. It's showtime. It's showtime.
It's showtime, folks.
Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning. Learning is fun.
And knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
We do love a trade show. It's a chance to see all the new stuff, to find out what people in your line of work are thinking, or what they're saying at any rate. It's a chance to gossip with old friends, load up on vendor merch, and maybe neck the odd free drink. But some shows offer more than that. With a big show, an important show like the one we're featuring in this Learning Hack special, you get the opportunity to take the temperature of a whole industry sector, of an entire profession. In this case, the learning profession. Kate Fitzgerald, Head of Fact. Do your facty thing, please.
Hack Facts.
Learning Technologies London is Europe's leading showcase of organisational learning and the technology used to support learning at work. With over 11,000 attendees from 50 different countries, a world-leading conference, 200 unmissable seminars and 200 international exhibitors, it continues to grow in importance, value and attendance year after year.
So, a significant show, and one that celebrated 25 years of existence this April. I've been coming to it for all that time, and what did I find this year? Well, let's listen to the voices of the people I talked to at the show, and let them tell the story. So this is it. Learning Technologies, London 2024, showtime. Closer Still, who run Learning Technologies, were kind enough to give me a little room overlooking the exhibition floor where I could do interviews. So I dragged in a mix of people to talk to, and what a rich mix it was. The analyst, the ingenue, the philosopher, the CLO, the keynoter, the vendor, the budget holder, and the pirate, yarr. So grab yourself a coffee and buckle in for my Learning Technologies experience.
My name's Adam Lacey. I'm the co-founder of Assemble U.
The first person I talked to was an exhibitor who was on a stand talking about something very close to my heart: podcasts for learning.
Consumer grade learning experiences, we like to call them now.
Launched from an LMS or an LXP.
Yeah, exactly that. So we can SCORM wrap all of our content, and we've actually worked very closely with Darryl Headley at Quantic to develop a SCORM file that almost mirrors a bit of a Spotify-like experience within an LMS. So super important, actually, if you're thinking about introducing audio into the way that you learn, is that end learner experience. How is that learner going to be consuming that audio? Because if it is a clunky, awkward experience that they can only get to on desktop, there's almost no point in doing it. It needs to be slick, it needs to be mobile, and it needs to be super easy to get to.
I can tell you've been on the stand all morning, because it's a very polished delivery.
Not my first show.
Yeah. So podcasting for learning is in a kind of early phase, a development phase. How would you characterise its spread and the uptake and how it's doing at the moment?
Yeah, really good question. So podcasts as a general concept for learning has been growing steadily over the last 10 to 15 years. People are using podcasts in their own time to enhance their knowledge in a vast variety of different subjects, be it learning, be it business, etc., etc. And obviously a lot of people using them for entertainment as well, which is also great. So that's kind of happening over there in the consumer world. What we're trying to do at Assemble U is harness a lot of that goodwill, I guess, that podcasts have, and also ease of use around the modality of audio. You can listen in the car while you're doing the dishes. You don't need to be at a screen. We're trying to bring that into the corporate learning environment. And in order to do that, we're putting in, I guess some extras that you wouldn't get in your traditional podcast. So our lessons, whether we're interviewing an expert or whether we are using a voice actor, they're a bit more structured. They're designed for that effective transfer of knowledge. And at all times we're thinking, right, what is useful? What is someone going to take from this that is genuinely useful? And then how are they going to action that? So how are they going to embed that? So we're talking about giving them actions and reflection points and all that kind of stuff. So it's taking your general kind of principles of, I guess, learning design, digital learning design, and trying to fit it into audio as the modality. And then there's a bit of technical jiggery pokery about how do you get that consumer grade experience into a learning management system or into an LXP, and get your listeners on the end of it. Interestingly, one of the things that we started doing, and we have, I don't know, maybe 25% of our customers use this, is a private podcast. So instead of putting these lessons through their learning management system, they actually put them through the podcast networks as a private podcast. That basically means they can then, or their learners can open them in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, not Spotify, unfortunately, and they get that very consumer grade learning experience because it sits alongside all the other podcasts they're listening to.
And that's something new since you talked to us on the Learning Hack podcast about it. So you're at the show here. What sort of conversations are you having on the stand, and what does that tell you about the kind of mood, level of knowledge of the audience for this?
We typically get a few responses. People saying, "Oh my God, I love podcasts," is quite a typical one. And then another one is people not quite understanding how podcasts work for learning, and then some people just not getting what we do at all and it needing a deeper explanation. But that's for our...
That's probably pretty common to everybody on these stands.
Yeah.
Spend a lot of time trying to explain, to baffle people what they do, and really it can be quite opaque. It's quite difficult to explain that. But podcast for learning in a way is quite a simple thing. Yeah,
it is. And I think we made a mistake from the first show we did Learning Tech 3 years ago here. We didn't have the word podcast anywhere on our stand. And the second that we put the word podcast on our stand, we had a lot more people stopping and talking to us. And that was really interesting. And that again, that's a consumer kind of creeping into corporate learning there.
That's Marketing 101.
Marketing 101, yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adam. I won't keep you from the stand. You've got stuff to sell.
Thank you, John. Great to chat.
I'm Hannah. I work at St James's Place, which is a finance company, and I work in the L&D team.
One aspect of the conference I always enjoy is the 30 Under 30 programme. This brings a much needed transfusion of fresh blood into the profession every year, so I made sure to talk to one of them. Come on down, Hannah Frame.
So came across L&D by chance because I was joined as a graduate and rotated around different business areas. Fell in love with L&D and have worked there now for 2.5 years in the team. And my role is Social Learning, Technology and Innovation Manager. So quite a long title, but I look at both social learning and tech innovation and how we can enhance peer-to-peer learning enabling by technology.
And what's the scale of it? How big's the team?
So our team's quite big, around like 35 of us, but all in all we service around 16,000 people. So that's employees, financial advisors and support staff. So it's a large network, predominantly UK, but we do also have some teams in Asia that our L&D team also support.
Marvellous. And how did you get involved with the 30 Under 30 programme?
So I fell upon the 30 Under 30 programme by chance. So I saw it online because I was looking at learning technologies. I'd registered to come because I heard about it through word of mouth and some other people in our company come along. I saw it and I thought, what a fantastic opportunity. I watched some of the videos from the cohort the year before, and I just thought the whole setup where you could meet speakers, the mentoring opportunities and connecting with people that have the same passion as me as a similar similar age, I thought it'd be silly
And
not
get
to
interviewed
apply.
by podcasters.
And get interviewed by yourself. Yeah, that was a definite plus.
Definite plus. Yeah.
So I spoke to my boss, was like, can I apply? And she was like, absolutely. And was fortunate that I got selected. So feeling very, very honoured about that.
What does it entail, the programme, going forward from, obviously, you get on the stage at the exhibition tomorrow and so on, get introduced, but what else does it entail?
Yeah, so a little bit nervous about going on stage, but I'm also quite excited. But essentially, so we met our cohort last night, which was a really great way because kind of got rid of any nerves before today. And then we joined, can get access to all the conference and the speakers. Also a lunchtime kind of networking opportunity to be able to talk to the chairs and the speakers in more detail on a one-to-one basis and ask them any questions, as well as access to mentoring after the programme as well. So there's a list of speakers that have put themselves forward as happy to have a mentee, and then we can apply and have a mentoring experience with them, which is amazing because it not only is it just for the conference, but it also continues afterwards, as well as kind of connecting with the others that are on the programmes. We've got a LinkedIn group, a WhatsApp group, and all very active in being able to continue the conversation once the conference is over, which is going to be brilliant.
What do you think what do you hope that the programme is going to do for you?
So I hope it'll give me kind of like insight, one, into what other companies are doing, because in my role as like innovating, I like to know what other companies are doing so I can bring it back into St James's Place and explore whether that's a possibility, and obviously suitable for our company. But also with career direction. So kind of quite new into L&D, been here for 2.5 years. I am doing a qualification at the moment in becoming an L&D business partner / consultant. So interested to kind of connect with people to find out more around the consulting side of things, to see if that is a path I'd like to go down, as well as just kind of great exposure in boosting my profile as I start out on my journey in L&D. I know L&D is where I want to be, and I would love to be a future leader in this space. So being able to raise my profile from such a kind of like starting out on my career is a fantastic opportunity.
So you say you fell in love with L&D. What is it that you like about it? And how do you view it as an innovative? It's not always thought of as the most innovative part of an organisation.
No.
You know, the marketing people have bigger budgets for tech and stuff. What do you feel about the innovation within the industry as you see it? As a, I hate to stereotype, but as a younger person, we're all assuming you've all got tech coming out of your ears as people who, it was invented during our lifetimes. Yeah,
so I'm quite fortunate that our team in L&D for SJP is very innovative. So we went through quite a transformative journey, which was came along by COVID, but we do a lot in the immersive technology space. So I've been really fortunate that my experience of L&D has been from bringing in virtual reality, bringing in AI, working from the very beginning to create these experiences that we have, as well as being able to bring in some other suppliers that have been able to support us on our journey, including being able to build a bespoke learning platform with the likes of Hula, who, again, because we can shape the roadmap, it means that we can be as innovative as we want and focus on the needs of the business. So we did a lot of addressing what the needs were and the challenges are within the business to be able to build our LXP, so learning experience platform, to be able to provide those kind of like personalised learning journeys, bite-sized learning, all these buzzwords you hear. So I just think I've been very fortunate in the company I'm in and the role of my manager and as a team that we can be quite innovative with the stuff we've been given.
It's great that you mention AI because nobody has mentioned it in the last 5 seconds. That's all I hear. Since the last session I was in. How are you using it within your team, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, and like you said, I don't think you can go 2 minutes in this conference without hearing the word AI. But we're using it in a really exciting way where we're providing that personalised learning experience. So a lot of the experiences that we're building, we're utilising AI to be able to provide that real-time feedback that's personalised to what they're saying. So as an example, we train our financial advisors to give advice to clients, and we've created this learning experience where you can talk to an avatar online and go through kind of some of the conversations you'd give to a client, and the AI will give you real-time feedback. So that's just one example of how we're using it in a way that provides a more personalised learning because it's shaped by what you put in. And another really exciting way we're just starting to look at it is around, like, it's a bit like algorithms, but AI can make it much more exciting, is that personalised learning experience in terms of suggesting learning when you don't know what you're looking for. So we see it in terms of places like Blinkist, which is summarises audiobooks, and if you don't know what you're looking for, it will suggest stuff on the platform. We'd love to do that for our learning experience platform. So we're just at the start of our journey there. But I mean, what comes to AI, the data that you put in needs to be obviously, and the data it's working with to generate this output, it needs to be spot on. So we're trying to sort that bit out first before we can really kind of delve into the opportunities that it will bring as an enabler, not to replace.
Not to replace, yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be interesting because you have a whole career ahead of you, unlike some of the older people you might talk to here. And how do you feel about that in terms of this idea that AI starts to replace, perhaps if not whole jobs, large functions, and that? How do you feel about that when you look forward to maybe the next, perhaps you don't, but you look forward to the next 20 years of your career or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be silly to sit here and say it's not like a worry, but I went to some really interesting talks this morning where it was talking around like AI is going to, and these technologies are going to make us much more efficient in what we need to do. And I think our skill set will need to change, and that's where we're, as an L&D team, responsible for making sure our workforce are equipped with the skills they need to work with AI and these technologies in a way that makes them more efficient, but our jobs will just change, and I don't think we'll ever lose the human touch, and we just need to become clever about what it is that us as humans can do that AI just purely can't or cannot do as well. So I think it was like, don't think about it as what it can and can't do, but you should think about it as what you should and shouldn't do. And I really loved that, because I think there are things where if you think of moral situations or judgment, empathy, AI and technology, certainly for now, can't do that. So actually that's where us as humans will forever have that power, and I firmly believe that. And so my role, obviously looking at social learning and the power of people, I think there's a real kind of opportunity there to tap into social learning, peer-to-peer learning, and keeping that human connection, whilst AI helps us do that in a more efficient way.
While you're here, you're at the conference, but you get a chance to look around the exhibition?
Yes, we do.
What's your impression of the vendor market?
I mean, there's a lot, isn't there? That is definitely, there's a lot that all seem to be doing the same thing, but maybe slightly different, which is fantastic, and it's great. There's so many suppliers and vendors out there, but it can be overwhelming, and I think it links back to knowing what your business needs are and what your people need, your employees need, and being able to then find vendors and solutions that fit the problem that you have, because it's very easy to get very excited by some of the kind of offerings out there. I certainly get very excited, and I'll go back to my team and say, I found this, but actually we don't need that. So I think you've got to be clever when you're looking at what it is that you need.
Marvellous. Well, before we started the interview, I was beginning to flag a bit. It's middle of the afternoon here. I fancy you might need a cup of tea as a pick-me-up. But how do you be a pick-me-up? So just last of all, I'm going to allow you to plug your podcast. And this is something I don't really want other podcasters to do, but I'll make an exception because you saved me a cup of tea.
No, thank you. Well, you've been lovely to talk to. But yes, we've got a podcast that myself and the director, SAP L&D run, called Every Day's a School Day, and you can find it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we talk to industry experts, but specifically focusing on technology. So if you're interested in technology, then do go and have a look and listen and subscribe.
And subscribe and like and share and all the rest of it. Thank you very much, Helmer.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I ran into a number of past podcast guests at the show, One of them being Julian Stodd, who I met on the exhibition floor and dragged in for a chat. He's an author, a strategic learning consultant, and winner of the LPI's Colin Corder Award for Services to Learning. I asked him what he looked for in shows like this.
You are an expert in learning and very interested in people, and you think very deeply in your books and so on. And you come to this cattle shed of commerce. I'm really interested to learn, what do you look for in a show like this?
Well, I'm not sure I'm an expert in anything, but I'm certainly curious about stuff. And part of that curiosity is in meeting people. And so really, these events for me are, of course, all about the people. And the space, I always think of these spaces a little bit like the medieval fairground. It's the field on the edge of the village that's empty all year, except once or twice a year when the fair comes into town and people get together. So for me, this is the fairground. You know, we've all come together. It's a chance to catch up with people, engage in ideas, and also to be a little bit engaged in difference, you know, to find ideas that you disagree with or aren't sure about. So I kind of like it like that. It's a bustling fairground. So I tend to see it like
interesting.
that.
It puts him in an interesting historical context, I think, because, of course, you know, markets that would have been markets of ideas as well. You know, markets would have passed down trade routes and so on. So if that's what you look for, is that what you're finding in this exhibition today? Tell me about what you've seen or what you've heard.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, how honest an answer would you like?
Completely honest.
So, completely honest. Well, at least nobody's going to hear our conversation, John. So, I think what I see is that there are a lot of ideas floating around in the learning space at the moment, and many of them, of course, are prefaced by those two letters of AI, which are a little bit totemic. And the language of generative artificial intelligence has become so pervasive so fast that I think we've removed people's permission to say, you know what, I'm not really quite sure. So they're absolutely sure they don't want to feel like an idiot, but they have very little permission to say, you know, can we have a basic conversation about it? And that's the kind of missing gap for me. There's all sorts of sort of overwhelming expertise and case studies, and there's all sorts of overwhelming products and commercial perspectives, but there isn't the slightly quieter, reflective space which says, you know, I'm a professional, I know my practice, and I'm curious, but I would like to gently get into these ideas in a kind of learning space rather than what can feel like a performance space. So that's the thing that's sort of missing. I failed to answer your question. I've told you the thing that's missing rather than the thing that is here. Yeah. You know, more broadly, I notice, I often find this when I walk around these spaces, is that there is such a lot of language about almost sort of self-rationalization. So the answer to, or the solution to, and it reminds me that there should also be a humility in practice. It's okay, as you know, my work is held in a principle of working out loud, of being sometimes quite uncertain and quite often wrong. And, you know, that's a space that's maybe missing here as well.
Yeah, so as a person with a marketing background, you know, that's the type of thing, that's the way that marketing doesn't speak, is humility or, well, I might be wrong.
Now, after 14 years, I realise I'm doing it wrong.
Stand, you know, in kind of letters 10 feet high. I'm looking out the window now and I can see all these huge kind of temples of stands, which at one point I would have been instrumental in putting up. What kind of conversations have you had that have struck you as interesting? Particular conversations that struck you as interesting or odd or enlightening or unenlightening?
I mean, I've had some really great conversations today. So Laura Overton, somebody who I'm sure is on
yes, friend of the
your
podcast.
radar. Yeah, I mean, Laura carries a wonderful humility in her practice, and I adore the way she is at the moment evolving her practice. And what we talked about was how we use these opportunities to share work, not to share certainty. So using, if you like, the performance part of our work as part of our own learning. And she's being very deliberate in that at the moment, in terms of sharing early stage ideas, gathering the feedback, using it to change her thinking. And I thought that's a very deliberate model of practice. And I really appreciated her taking the time to share that with me. So as I say that, I realise that my respect for Laura, and I really, have a great deal of respect for her and her practice, is because she rarely talks to me or in public about her certainty. She talks about the things she is learning. She's data led. She brings a scientific approach, but she moves her position on things. That's much more attractive to me than people who say, I'm right. I was right 10 years ago. I'm still right now. I carry this absolute certainty in my work.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I sort of reflect that similarly with a similar admiration for Laura. In a different way, is that the people I tend to value in these sort of events are the people who've got data. So people like Laura, I mean, it goes way back with the studies that she's done with Towards Maturity and so on, which is an ongoing study now. She's not necessarily associated with it, but she's always been very data led. Dani Johnson, who we'll be talking to, and so on. They haven't just got language, and of course the Fosway people, they haven't just got language, they've got, it sounds a bit reductive and a bit, left brain to say, to harp on about data all the time, but it is an empirical kind of, it's an observation of what they've seen rather than more language.
Yeah, it absolutely. I mean, we should be rigorous. Well, let me rephrase that. We don't have to be rigorous in our practice, but we should at least signpost when we are or are not being. Like intuition is a great thing, and strength of feeling is a good thing, but data is also a good thing. Yeah. And to understand what it is valuable. I always say I lead with the fact. Usually, I say I'm a researcher. I'm an evidence-based practitioner, but I'm also speculative in my work. In fact, it's quite funny. It was a big discussion for myself and Seychatz and Jeff Stead, who are my co-authors on the learning science book we're working on at the moment. And I said to them, I want us to be speculative. I don't just want to write the book which says, here is the evidence and this is what the research says. Like, I want that. But then I want to say, and this is where it carries my thinking. So it's okay as long as you signpost it. When I wrote the blog today, I got 2/3. It's a really long post today because I had a long train journey. I got about 2/3 of the way through it, and I said, and now I'm moving into speculation. So you can choose to engage with that or not, and I think that's perfectly okay.
From all good bookshops, folks.
It will be when it's out, when we finish the darn thing.
Oh, where are you still working on it?
Yeah. Engines of Engagement is out. The curious book about generative AI is out. That was our distraction. Yeah. But the learning science book, which has an interesting history to it, is still a work in progress. Hopefully at the end of the year.
Lovely. Well, I hope you'll come on the podcast and tell us all about it when it does come out. And I'm going to sort of signal that I'm being rigorous here in saying that I could easily talk to you for another hour or so, but we have to keep these short. Thank you very much, Julian.
Thanks, John.
For your reflections.
Well, my name's Paul Matthews. I founded People Alchemy, it's 25 years ago now, actually, coming up to an anniversary, which is amazing. And we do learning software and learning transfer, and I've written a few books in the L&D field. So,
Born and raised on a farm in New Zealand, Paul takes a very practical, no-nonsense approach with a focus on learning, transfer and performance.
And you've appeared on the Learning Hack podcast. We had a very good episode with you a while back, so people can look that up. And it's coincidentally you founded at the same time as this show was being founded, because it is the 25th anniversary of the show. The reason I wanted to drag you up here to the room and talk to you is because I think of you as the learning transfer man, and we're learning a lot about the market here and what's going on in the show. But transfer into performance and expertise is what people are really after here. And you said something before we started rolling, which is very interesting, about the way that experts organise the knowledge in their minds and how that's different from students. Could you say that again?
Well, again, this does apply a little bit to the transfer. That I read an article about this years ago, and the research was showing that the way that delegates, students, trainees organise stuff in their mind is more or less the way they're taught it. In other words, kind of almost chapter by chapter, just like the textbook. Whereas someone's been out there for 5-10 years or so starts organising that differently, and the way they do it is it's problem-centred. So the problem is more or less their new chapter headings, and then all the bits that are relevant to that problem are kind of attached to it neurologically in the way they think. Whereas a student doesn't have those direct attachments between problem and the knowledge bank they have. So it makes the expert or the experienced person much quicker and more able to deal with a problem and see the connections that will help them work with that problem.
I think that's really interesting, because I think, bringing it back to me, the way I approach the learning market and the learning industry, it's an industry for a show like this, is probably more like a student in the way the knowledge is organised. I think there are various chapters like, oh yes, there's engagement and there's this topic and that topic. And I suppose it's a bit academic. But one thing you learn from coming here and listening to, talking to people who are practitioners, who have real responsibility for learners within their organisations, is that they're very problem-centred, actually. They've got a problem, they've come here to try and fix it. Walking around the exhibition, what's been your experience of the way that vendors communicate with practitioners?
I think it varies. Inevitably this year there's a whole veneer of AI over the top of everything, and some of it's smoke and some of it's mirrors and some of it's real. Yeah. And it's often quite difficult to figure out which is which of those when you're talking to the vendors. Hopefully the stuff that is smoke and mirrors will eventually not be. But I think also a lot of, a lot of what they say is self-serving, obviously, which is understandable given they're on a stand trying to sell stuff. But it can lead some of the practitioners astray in terms of thinking what's really important, and it's the bright, shiny new object that they are trying to put in front of this person and get them going. And I think that can take people's attention away from what really matters, which is what they're there to do eventually, which is to get people doing things differently and doing different things, which is Robin Hoyle's definition of learning, which I think is really great. So there's this need to focus on impact and operationalizing what people learn, not just helping them just learn it. It's got to go beyond that, which is, I think, why you talk to me about transfer quite a bit. So,
yeah. So do you think there's a danger that the massive kind of hype and smoke and mirrors around AI drives out focus on things like transfer to performance, which is really your big area?
I've actually heard very little talking about transfer from an AI perspective. It's focused on content creation, on designing learning outcomes, and there's a lot of things there, but not a heck of a lot on beyond that. There's some of it starting to happen with AI coaching bots and things like that, which could be used for post-course transfer. So I think it's coming, but I think it's still early days in the thinking for some of that.
Yeah, a lot of the talk has been about content creation. There are kind of optimistic signs. People seem to be using data more for assessment and for measurement of learning than they did before, and I think people have been waiting for years for that to start to happen. So that's a useful trend, I suppose, in your direction.
I think yes, and I think the other part of that is the performance support tools that are going to be much more user-friendly with AI. I mean, Gloria Geary talked about this back in the 90s, where she talked about an EPSS, electronic performance support system. So this is again about helping people in the moment at the point of need to actually get the bit of information they want. So learning in the flow of work, Josh Berson's approach to it. So I think there's a lot of things we're now going to be able to do that we couldn't do before. But it'll take a little while for that to settle in and for it to become part of, well, that's just what we do now, rather than this new thing that we're still kind of struggling, I think, it's slippery. And I think a lot of people say it's wonderful, but a lot of organisations, I understand, are also having trouble get their hands around it to actually get value from it. Yeah. The CEO's thinking, yeah, come on, let's go and use AI, and yet the organisations are still struggling to really grab it and get value from it at an organisational level.
I'm sure we'll get there. You've touched on something there which I think is very interesting, especially when I'm talking to kind of older people who've been around for a while in the field, is that suddenly things are, as you say, Gloria Geary talked about this particular facet a way back, and I've come across that several times over the last couple of days. People saying, amazing, we always wanted to do this. For some reason, we all found it too difficult. AI is allowing us to do it at last, and almost kind of scratching their heads. My experience of going to these shows is that a lot gets talked about that you don't see actually happen in the real world for, 3, 5, 10 years.
That happens. I mean, what popped into my mind, it's like the fashion industry. There's lots of stuff that happens on the catwalk that you never see in the real world. Yeah. But it does lead trends, and it does get people thinking in different ways. And that's the benefit of this kind of leading edge stuff. Whether that leading edge stuff is right to go into production in a real-time environment is a different story.
Yeah, the catwalk metaphor there is so true. So as we're limited for time, I'm going to have to let you get back to the fashionable and glamorous catwalk world of learning technologies. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thanks, John.
My name is Thimon de Jong. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a social psychologist specialized in changing human behavior, and specifically the future of human behavior.
My next guest, Thimon de Jong, gave a highly entertaining and stimulating keynote at the conference. Its title poses a question I ask myself all the time. What on earth will people do next?
You talked quite a bit about mental health and technology. Does improving our mental health always mean shying away from technology?
Well, it's not a one-on-one. So I talked about mental health in the context of the so-called polycrisis that we're in. We're not in a good state of world, state of polycrisis. That leads actually to a mental health crisis. On the one hand, and actually didn't talk about that on stage, is that technology is actually it's not good for our mental health. Addicted to social, and especially social media. So addiction to our mobile phones, social media. On the other hand, there are many solutions on there. So people go to TikTok, they go to all kinds of platforms to find an online coach, online counseling, to share their feelings, to find peers who have similar. So it can be a cause, a root of the problem, but can also be a solution.
Yeah, so not completely terrible.
No, I'd say currently more terrible. I think social media should actually be labeled anti-social media in its current state, but I'm quite optimistic about the next wave of social media.
Yeah, it feels if it's got worse. Started off with things like Friends Reunited, and people were saying, oh, isn't this marvellous, and I can keep track of what my kids are up to, and relatives in other countries, and then suddenly, it got bigger and bigger. and more monetized things start to happen, and it feels quite bad.
But John, you can start your own social medium tomorrow. The bar is low, so I think there are a few tiny initiatives out there, but I think this Generation Z or Generation Alpha, the younger generation we have now, I think they're looking at us and think, what were you doing with Twitter, X, and TikTok and Facebook? Here's a new version.
Yeah, that's great. That's given me a great entrepreneurial idea. I'm going to do the kind of John Helmer version of Truth Social, I think.
Yeah, Truth. Yeah, and why not? Why not? Right? It's not that these things are set in stone. It's digital, and they're not that old. How old are they? 15, 20 years?
Yeah. It is funny now. I don't know what the media climate's like over technology in the Netherlands, other parts of Europe, but certainly in the UK, whenever they have a story about mental health among younger people, social media comes up really early on there. And it is similar with AI. And I know there's a lot of technophobia, techno-fear within the L&D community because they're basically people. How can we allay people's fears about AI? Because they do seem to to become quite catastrophic.
Yes. So coming back to the poly crisis, we've had so many crises over the past 4 or 5 years that this whole wave of AI and the ChatGPTs of this world coming, it feels like, is this another big wave? Is this like the COVID pandemic? Is this like the Ukraine war? Is this just another crisis? And we're actually bracing ourselves a bit. It's like this we're so used to being showered by bad news. We think it's bad news. Now, does it mean it's good news? No, it definitely, we still, it can go either way. But people are bracing themselves because they've been, let's say we celebrated the end of a crisis and like, okay, let's go back to normal. And we haven't gone back to normal for the past 4 to 5 years. Right. So people are bracing themselves. So that's the current state of the world. And then you have the technophobia, automation, anxiety, etc. We've known this for over 100 years. If there's a new technology, majority of people emotionally say no to it. But try to say that in an environment like this, learning technologies. If you say that in an organization, don't like it, don't trust it, we're not going to use it. You say I'm a dinosaur, right? Because here it's AI. Oh yes, AI. People rationally have to say, I like it, I love it, because you want to be a future-focused digital professional, right? Yeah. Embracing the future, embracing the next big thing. So you're putting yourself outside of the organization and outside of the now and the future. And that's very hard to do. But a lot of people feel, but they don't say it. And then you get a weird dynamic in organizations where people say, oh, great, AI for learning, great. But they actually, what they feel from the inside is the opposite.
So they're kind of acting rather than...
Sometimes it's subconscious, but this is one of the reasons why many innovations fail.
Yes.
Because they say one thing, feel the other, and then when you start developing, rolling it out, it's Right. And that's not even talking about the learners; it's just the people, who develop this, work with it.
Yes, and even on the vendor side as well.
100%. Yes,
it's interesting.
So are you in here? Automation anxiety when it comes to AI? Where do you stand?
I tend to be quite sceptical about it. You talked about the Y2K bug, that older people know about. The year 2000, all the computers were going to melt down, and the civilizations we know it fighting in the streets. People started building bunkers and things. I was sceptical about that at the time, I have to admit. I think maybe I'm just too cynical, but
but then, so you were not scared then?
No.
Okay, but a little bit now.
I think the things that really frighten me are more geopolitics and, potential Third World War.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think we're going to wipe ourselves out before AI will do that.
Yeah.
So
and
same for the climate, by the way.
I also think a lot of OpenAI. I was reading an article in the FT this morning about how OpenAI is a misnomer. It's not at all open. None of the AI systems are that open. There are some open source systems like the Grok and so on, and the Meta one, but they are still kind of tightly limited. People are very aware of.
But what a brilliant name, OpenAI. Yeah. Social media, what a brilliant name.
Yeah.
A trust fund or trust fund, what a brilliant name.
Yeah, Truth Social.
It's like, it's The names are brilliant.
Yes. It's the branding. So going back on that, what advice would you say to L&D, heads of L&D and so on, who have teams and they want to allay the fears of AI and so on, and other tech as well? What practical advice would you give them about how to do that?
Well, the first most important thing is, so if you have a team, you have to find out how do you feel about this new technology. So say, AI is coming in, what do we feel? If you have the rational conversation, everyone says, yes, it's the future, because that's in the newspapers every day. So you need to have a conversation how people really feel. If you ask them straight up front, most people will say, no, I'm enthusiastic. So there are a few ways you can go about it. So practical one is to actually discuss a piece of AI or a piece of new technology that's going on that's not related to the business. So, for example, self-driving cars, which is not, it's not related to learning technology, or I talked about cryptocurrencies. So take something there, have a conversation about the emotions there. It's not related to the business. So people will open up and just start talking about their fears and the worries and about other people embracing it too fast. And you have this whole conversation about the emotional side of new technology. And then a meeting leader should say, brace the gap now. We'll slowly go, you can have an in-between where we can say, all right, now let's talk about the technology at hand. But because the first 10 minutes, 30 minutes were very open, people then say, but how does this, so you're fearful of crypto, you're fearful of a self-driving car because of ethical concerns. How does this translate to the AI that we might roll out? And then you can't go back to, oh no, it's great, because you had that whole open emotional conversation before. So this is I call it a trick way. It's an indirect way of approaching the emotional side of tech. And I've done this with groups. It works extremely well.
Yes.
Especially
psychologists are so sneaky, folks. But I think that's sneaky in a good way. I know it's good.
No, we're helping. No, just sneaky. It's we're helping people. We're helping people open up, and everyone benefits. But then it's like, where are we? And then you can still find people that say no. And then it's the question, all right, so what's holding? Is it a fear that it's going to wipe us out? Is it a fear that you will lose your job? Right? Where's the fear? Where's the uncertainty? Where's the anxiety? And that differs from person to person. And if it's like, I'm going to lose my job, then as an organization, you have to address that in a different way. And then this is going to wipe the whole society out. That's a different kind of fear. So there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for your team and the worries that might live there.
Yeah, I think that's really useful advice. Bit of a change of subject, really. Talking about mental health, what do you think of the kind of conference exhibition experience? What is that like for mental health? Because it's very exciting, very stimulating, but has some downsides as well.
Well, I had a walk around, and it's filled with people. So yes, of course, there's AI, there's screens, and you can try it, but there's a person standing next to it. So it's deeply human. So I'm very happy, and I visit quite a few conferences. But still, people doing the talking with people, and people love it. Now, I gave in my keynote just now, I gave the audience two little things to discuss with the person sitting next to them. And what I've found over the past few years is that the noise level and the energy when I do this exercise has gone up.
Right.
People are, we're so much behind our screens that if you say, talk to your neighbor about, how do you, question said, what do you do to stay mentally healthy? Discuss that. Which sounds a bit like a scary thing saying it now here in the podcast, but if you say it's an explosion. It's like people go, whoa! And it's such a big difference from 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes.
People want to have a conversation because there's so much screen. I'm tapping now on my mobile phone. And I think for physical events like this, and I'm pointing now at the conference room.
We have a window here that looks out on the conference floor.
Look how many people are standing at every booth. And this deeply human need to have a conversation with an actual human being, that's only going up. And the more AI will get, the more the need will be to actually have a physical talk. And it's both, right? So yes, there's more AI, but there's more of a need. And the energy is going up. And in my keynotes, I'm building in more, have a conversation with the person sitting next to you, because people are just dying to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective on it. We were talking off tape about how triggered I am by coming to the exhibition because I used to be head of marketing, putting up the stands and all the problems with that. So I kind of associate it with high stress levels. I'm sure it's completely different for the visitors.
Yes. I think it's like, hey, lovely, there are people there. Of course, they're trying to inform you. So you have the expedition vibes. It's like, there are people.
Yeah.
Right?
Lovely.
I'm looking at them to see if there's anything I can point out. But there's screens and tech everywhere. But, what I see as a social psychologist, I see people having conversations with people.
Yeah. Okay. It's been really interesting to chat with you, to meet in the flesh, IRL, as the young people say.
Well done, John. Well done. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you a last question, an extremely open question. What the hell are people going to do next?
That's an excellent one. Well, we're not going to change. So often we think we live in the most unique times in history. Our technology is different than everything before. And, the next generation is so different than us. We're not. It's not that much changing. It's this polycrisis situations. We've had those before. Everything has happened before. We're not unique. Our human needs stay the same. Yes, the outside might change, all the tech and that might change. But if you look at how people actually interact, the conversation that we're having right now, what are people going to do? The same thing as they did yesterday. It just might look a bit different from the outside.
On that bombshell, thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yarr. Hoisting the skull and crossbones on the starboard bow was the learning pirate herself, Lauren Waldman. But though piracy might be her calling card, Lauren's real area of expertise is not plunder and booty so much as neurons and synapses, in other words, the brain, and how the brain learns.
The biggest issue that we have is that we take the brain for granted. And that's because we were never really taught about it before. And so while technology is moving at the speed of light and we're adapting our new behaviors and we're using these tools, we're still not being discerning enough because we haven't really learned the fundamental underlying skills of how is it that we're learning and how is it that we are creating a memory to best use all of these technologies.
To be fair, I suppose we do know more about the brain than we did certainly when I went to school. So that knowledge is coming on leaps and bounds, I think.
It is, and I know that this might be a slightly unfair question considering that, one of the biggest problems about getting the research and the science into the industry is the lack of translators and practitioners like myself. But, when I can go onto the conference floor and ask, I'd say a good 90% of the vendors how their solution is helping to create a memory in a human brain, and they don't know the answer to that,
yes,
then that to me is a fundamental problem, because then we've also got designers who might not know how to use that solution to the best of its ability.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to make that better, one podcast episode of Great Minds of Learning at a time. Obviously, it's slow to spread. I mean, to some degree, it has seeped into the consciousness, isn't it? I mean, all the time you hear people throwing around terms like dopamine and cortisol and this part of the brain does this and so on. That's in the popular discourse. Is it a problem, though, that a lot of this is kind of, to use an old English expression, neurobollocks?
It's 1 million. Oh, my colleague Joseph Dublin just absolutely loves that. I think it's really dependent on the credibility of the source of who it's coming from.
Right.
So neuroscience, a few years back became such a popularized word in the industry, but it was being spoken about by people who didn't have the credentials or the validity to be credibly giving these explanations. So although dopamine is a very well-known neuromodulator, it's not necessarily something that somebody can speak to as what does it actually do when it's functioning in a human brain? What does acetylcholine do when we activate it to help us get to brain states? And they wouldn't be able to explain that.
Yes, because dopamine itself is, just to pick that case in point, is a lot more complicated. It's not just happy.
No, actually, dopamine has been popularized by that sort of that famous let's get a dopamine hit.
Yes.
When really we know that dopamine's primary function is to help sustain motivation. So it's not as simplified as everybody would like it to be, but it's what sells to people who don't know any better.
Right.
And I think that's a big issue.
Yeah. And while we're on that subject, what about the latest kid on the block AI and what that does to our brains?
Whew. This is a big conversation that not only I'm having, but the scientists are having, especially the educational scientists are having right now, because it has just inundated everything from the educational systems right through to our profession of learning and development. And I think where there is opportunity and where we really should be turning our attentions to is balancing the skill between using the technology, but also our human skill and being more discerning with it. And so there's a lot of talk on my side saying, well, how do we know what we know and what we don't know? And if we're just being very trusting of what AI is spitting out at us, we're not being discerning enough. And in order to be more discerning, we need to increase our ability to focus so that we've got very strong, what we call metacognitive skills, so that we are challenging our own ways of thinking in the moment to be more discerning and looking at something going, is that actually accurate? Is this actually going to work in practice?
Yes.
Before we just say, well, that was done quickly. Wonderful. Next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been a problem since the internet came along. It's that, we used to authoritative sources, perhaps in the old days, and there are few far between on the internet. Wikipedia looks like one of them, but even then people complain about that. I read my own Wikipedia page. It's probably not a good idea. Don't do it.
I don't know, is there such thing as Wikibollocks? Or
Yes, I believe this. So that's been there for a while, but it's this something that's accelerated with AI, because it's the kind of authority of generative AI with which it speaks, the confidence it speaks in that kind of West Coast American voice at you, that it's incredibly cultural specific, apart from anything else. And, you tend to believe it. And then you look up the references and say, well, you made that up.
Yeah.
This is now a kind of acknowledged sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is this just an acceleration of that tendency of the internet to make it difficult for us to trust what we're seeing? Or is there a step change here?
Ooh, I don't know if it's making it difficult to trust. I think it's almost making us more trusting. And that, I think, is where there's a larger concern. So like I was saying just before, is that if we trust that when we put something in there that the model might not have been trained on yet. I'll give you a very simple example. We've got lots of people who are just throwing content in and asking the system to design out a piece of learning. Yeah. And they're throwing in the terminologies of, please use spaced repetition and please use interleaving. But the problem is the people who are inputting that don't understand themselves the variables that need to be put into a learning design so that spaced repetition and interleaving works effectively. Yeah. And if they don't know that, then they won't be able to tell when it's spat back out of them to this design that AI has done for them. So if they never learned it in the first place, they're not even going to recognize whether it's right or wrong.
Yes, I think that's interesting. Your own when the thing is in your own expert area, you suddenly get that feeling of, well, something's a bit wrong here. So it's like getting ChatGPT to do my social posts for me, and I look at the hashtags it's put in, and as a marketing person, that hashtag's not going to have any kind of, about 3 people might once have used that as a hashtag, but so do you really know what you're doing here on SEO and all the rest of it? But it feels as if I should trust it in a way I don't myself, because I'm so old.
Oh gosh, I mean, the first little experiment that I did with ChatGPT was to ask it about, can you tell me about learning design and using science? And within the first 3 lines, it said something about learning styles, and that just completely discredited the whole system for me at that moment.
Yeah, we'll bleep that out because we don't.
No.
Donald Clock on the phone. So can't close out without mentioning your amazing brand presence, which I've always meditated on, which is how wonderful it is. It's the whole learning piratical thing. Does this give you problems as well? Do people sort of not take you seriously as a neuroscientologist.
Neuroscientologist.
Whatever you want, because of the pirate thing, and
I think in some ways it has worked against me. But then I think where it's done very well is in the advocacy for better learning, for integration of these. So, there's so many people. I'll walk, even here at Learning Technologies, be walking the trade show floor and they don't know my name, but they're like, "Oh, the pirate." I'm like, "Yes, that's me." And they know who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
So they understand that the pirate is the brand, but there is a scientist, and a very credible scientist behind the brand.
Yes. Well, and it's a great exemplar of the science of awareness and how the brain notices things and how things stick in the brain. And, so you're kind of a meme. You're an earworm in a way as well.
I can't say I've ever been described like that.
You staged a very brand characteristic intervention yesterday on the floor of the exhibition.
Oh, I thought we weren't going to talk about that. I did, and it wasn't to serve myself, but it was to serve others.
Of course.
And I think one of the best things for those of you who aren't at the conference or haven't attended before, we're dealing with thousands of people, thousands of vendors, a ton of stimuli coming at you, and you're almost exhausted within the first 10 minutes. So upon request, and then, yes, I did take over the cafe downstairs. And one of the first things I did with everybody who attended that session, this impromptu session, was to downregulate the system.
Yes.
And to teach them, how do we manage when you are being inundated with stimuli from every angle? And I think that was most appreciated, so that they could then focus and move on with their days. And of course, we talked about learning science and scientific learning design, but yes, I did do that.
And I think the thing I said at the time is it reminded me of reading about the French Revolution and I think it's the Palais Royal, where the people would just get up and start speaking, and Danton and his friends, and people would kind of gather around them, and this was the roots of the revolution. Are we starting a revolution here?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I really do. I think there's another very large conference that's going to be happening in North America next month, and there was similarly acknowledged that Learning Technologies, granted we are a technology conference, but when out of 100% you've only got 10% of sessions that are actually dealing with human learning, then yes, we have a problem. And I think that is, if nothing else, a good call for a learning revolution.
On that bombshell, I've got to stop doing that. Thank you very much, Laura.
My pleasure.
Cheers.
A couple of our interviewees voiced concerns about the hype and BS surrounding AI, so I wanted to talk to someone who is fast forging a reputation for talking sense about the subject and has research to back up what she says. Egle Vinauskaite heads a learning innovation studio called Nodes and is a founder member of the AI Learning Collective. I asked what had changed in the fast-moving world of AI since she last appeared on the podcast 5 months ago.
In terms of what's happening in L&D, about half a year ago, there were very few people or organizations that were using AI in any meaningful way aside from just doing this and that. And some of them were experimenting. Right now, a few more organizations are moving into this pilot experimentation stage, but it's not a wholesale change by any means.
Yeah. And you've been compiling use cases, which is there's a lot of focus on that. People are really pleased to see that happening, I think. You shared some in your session. Can you kind of encapsulate for us in 25 words or less what you brought to the conference, what you said to people this morning?
So I talked about the report that Donald Taylor and myself published just a few days ago. And we had done an online survey where we asked people in L&D how they're using AI to understand how that, exactly your question, how that changed since the last time we asked them this. And it showed, unsurprisingly, that still the majority of use cases in L&D are very strongly in the content corner, meaning learning design tasks, which are mostly content outlines, give me some ideas for learning activities, content, text, image, audio, video, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you're researching the content.
Yeah, and researching the content,
Yeah,
yes. And translation as well.
Oh, and translations.
Yeah, it wasn't in the top 3, but it was visible. It was very popular.
As we move further down your graph to things that people are doing but doing much less or not doing at all, what sort of uses were there?
Yeah, so that was quite surprising in a way, because we hear a lot of talk about skills-based organizations, about skills-based talent management, about perhaps now using data-informed decision-making in L&D. But when we looked into how many people are actually doing that, that was not very many. There were a few dozen at best.
Yeah, I've seen, while I've been at the show, I've seen some LinkedIn posts where people have been walking around saying, this is terrible, everybody's just using it for content and nobody's doing the complicated stuff, and a lot of kind of, rather judgmental kind of posts about that. But what I really liked about your presentation was you gave the reason for that. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? It's the complexity spectrum.
Complexity scale.
Complexity scale, yeah. Not spectrum.
Sure. So when I looked at all of these use cases, and then I started speaking with various organizations, bigger and smaller, about how they're using AI, I was trying to understand how is it that, how come we are stuck mostly in the content sphere, and there are all of these more exciting, more innovative, more arguably powerful and meaningful AI use cases, and why that's not happening. Like performance support is one of them. And what I realized is that there is a scale from simple AI implementation to a sophisticated AI implementation, meaning on the simple side, if you can imagine a scale which is going from left to right, and on the far left you have things like admin tasks, and if you you have things like content development, and the reason they are being adopted very quickly is because L&D doesn't need any extra skills or resources beyond your little friend ChatGPT to do that.
You don't have to go and ask anyone else in the organization about it. You don't have to ring up a supplier. You just fire up ChatGPT.
Exactly. And you can do that in your silo and do some little tweaks here and there. It's pretty much tactical stuff, very much. And then on the right side, the further right you go, the more additional skills and resources and relationships that L&D needs to have to make these more sophisticated AI uses happen.
Right. Yeah, and that involves you have to get the help of suppliers maybe with that, or you have to reach out to other bits of the organizations. One thing that really struck me was when you said, to use a co-pilot isn't an L&D decision, it's a business decision. So it becomes part of the business.
Exactly. So in some cases, for example, if you want to do your simple data analysis, you need that data from somewhere, especially if you're trying to understand business impact. The data isn't going to come from learning. Some of it may, or some of it will, but you're going to have some relationship with the business to actually get that data from the business. You might need additional skills to analyze the data and make sense of it. So that's an example. If you're going further up to performance support, like for example, co-pilots, exactly as you say, it's not L&D that decides to use them. Obviously, Microsoft Copilot is not the only thing, but still, even if you fire up your say another vendor AI assistant, it still needs to plug into your organizational data knowledge base, which is a decision which is not made by L&D.
Yeah, and there are kind of gatekeepers for that data and so on. So based on what you've seen and what you presented today, what would you expect to see over the next, say we'd come back to this show this time next year, which perhaps we will, what would you expect to have happened by then? Hostage fortune here.
Yeah, I don't think that something transformational is going to happen in the next year. I think what's going to happen is hopefully we're going to have more case studies and we can start talking about what are the best practices, because right now we don't have any best practices of using AI in L&D. Right now we have examples of how people use it. We don't, in many cases, we don't know if they work. We just know that it is possible and someone has done it. Yeah. So hopefully more organizations would have moved from not using it or using it for very simple things to perhaps running a more sophisticated pilot, perhaps collaborating with the rest of the business. But I'm not expecting a huge scale of that happening.
It would be interesting to see whether the kind of noise around AI dies down, because at the moment it's very noisy. There's a lot of noise, a lot of blather, to be quite honest. And, vendor marketing departments come into this, but also, people who speak at conferences and so on. Do you think that there are any dangers in the amount of hype and noise and BS around it?
Definitely. And there's quite literal noise because we're recording this next to an exhibition floor.
Yeah.
The problem with AI hype is that it is a kind of technology that it is, just like any piece of technology, it is agnostic, as in it can be used for something that is positive or something that is negative, something that is useful, something that just creates trash, pretty much. And the thing is that as that technology is perhaps more sophisticated than your authoring tool or something that L&D is quite familiar with, or some design tools, and you need to understand, especially when it comes to data and more advanced use cases for it, you need to understand, you need to have a much deeper technical understanding. And I think the problem with hype is that you're now going on the exhibition floor and we have probably, I don't know, easily 50 vendors saying that they're doing AI, something with AI and learning, and magic is going to happen. Yeah. And you as a buyer, you do not have this just your perhaps a point of view, a well-informed point of view about what is a good use and what is going to actually be useful, because what you're in your organization, as well as understanding and being able to independently assess vendors' claims. So I think that is where the danger is, because now everything is about we're using AI and we're making magic happen, is going to solve all of your problems, which is not helpful.
Yes, I think that's something that Marcus says is that the vendor proposition tends to be use AI and we can automate this and it will be done automatically, and he says no system does anything automatically.
Oh yeah, I really like that.
I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, and I was thinking about my own uses of AI, and I'm just thinking, okay, I saved about 10% of me time in doing this bit of the workflow with ChatGPT. If only I could get it to kind of walk across the room and press that button and do that thing, then, it really would kind of happen on its own. But that thing of instantiating it into the real world, of making connections with one system and another, with, various proprietors, sort of bits of kit, and there are so many walled gardens around, that all gets quite difficult still.
Yeah. And I think another problem is that a lot of people try to automate instead of enhance with AI, which is a problem because, first of all, AI right now, in many cases, AI cannot deliver like a full, learning design or a written piece of content to the level that someone who's very experienced in that can do. Yeah. But that's the expectation, and then of course the expectation isn't met, and then people just stop using it. And I think the way to go about it is to understand that the goal is not to take you out of the process. It is using it, working with it.
I could ask you, just to close out, a question that I've asked other people as well, which is how do you think we deal with the tendency towards techno-fear in people industries, as it were, like L&D, HR, very much people. There is some kind of lingering techno-fear that, well, not just lingering, it's really quite palpable in some circumstances. What's the best way to kind of allay that within your organisation, do you think, when it comes to AI?
In L&D or generally in the broader organization?
In L&D, I think.
Yeah, in L&D. I think there is no going around actually using technology and being fluent with it, because if you're fearful of technology, the technology is going to get increasingly more sophisticated, so it's not going to get better. So you just need to bite the bullet, essentially. And there might be gentler ways to go about it. But this is, I think, perhaps if we go into the question of identity, of how people see themselves, and if they, for example, started out in the industry being in-person trainers, and now they have to deal with these sophisticated AI-powered platforms, it's a bit of a leap, but I think it's more of a case of the world evolved, your job evolved, but how you see yourself maybe has not. And it's about catching up with that and perhaps reconsidering how you see yourself in L&D.
Yeah. I'm very conscious of how multi-generational the industry is, because we talked to one of the 30 under 30, and it is interesting. You have people in the labour force now. They might not have come from being an in-person trainer. They might have come from being an Instagram influencer. And that's the transition.
These Gen Zers.
Gen Zers, yes, yeah. That's the big problem, isn't it? Yeah. And on that bombshell, so thank you very much, Egle. It's been lovely to talk to you again, and I hope we can talk again in the future.
Thanks, John.
I was lucky enough to be able to talk to two of my favourite analysts in the learning technologies space, starting with Dani Johnson of Red Thread. I last spoke to Dani back in 2020 when the pandemic was raging. I asked her now what had happened in learning technologies since then.
Well, during the pandemic, we know that everybody started investing in learning tech. We saw a huge spike in venture capital money, as well as in organizations that were investing in learning tech. And I think that was a reaction to, oh my goodness, they're not in a room anymore with us. We've got to figure out how to do that. Since the pandemic ended, some of that has evened out just a little bit. But at the same time, new conversations have come in that have upheld it. It's still not as, frenetic as it was during the pandemic, but new conversations, especially those on skills and quantifying ability and those types of things, have introduced all kinds of new ways of thinking about learning and how we do it. The other big thing, the elephant in the room that we must talk about, is Gen AI. That happened 18 months ago, and it has also introduced several new things that we can do with learning tech.
Yeah. The unexpected theme for me of your talk was optimism, and optimism in a particular area around kind of evaluation and measurement of learning and use of data. Mm-hmm. People have been saying at this conference for years, we've got to do more of this, and every year you come back, they haven't done it.
Yeah.
And now they have. And, there were kind of visible gasps from some of the older members of the audience. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I'm not sure that all organizations are doing it, but we're more enabled to be able to do it than we ever have been before because of the technology and the ways that vendors are looking at this thing.
Yeah.
I think a couple of interesting things are happening. First of all, data has become very important to organizations, and more leaders are making decisions based on data rather than the good old gut check. And because of that, it is forcing L&D to think a little bit differently about what's going on there. One of the other things that is happening is that L&D is being pulled in to the rest of the organization. So for a long time, it was kind of a silo sitting on the side of the company. And now, because the conversation about employee experience is tied to performance and tied to talent acquisition and tied to talent management and all those things, the trend is toward one conversation instead of 6 different conversations. And because that's true, the technology and the data associated with that also needs to integrate and be interoperable, as well as share data to make everything work the way that it should.
So how will that look in practical terms in an organisation, and how L&D sits in an organisation? How will it feel different?
I think one of the challenges that L&D has always had is they are fairly insular in the way that they do things. They speak a different language. They tend to measure things that the rest of the organization doesn't care about. Those types of things are still existing, but we're starting to see sort of a groundswell of support to do that differently. We're also seeing new voices come into L&D. Yeah. So whereas before people came up through the ranks, we're seeing many more marketing people and operations people see learning and the potential that learning has to really sort of the way that I describe the responsibility of learning is to ensure a skilled workforce. That's what we do. Yeah. And the organizations seem to be taking that more seriously.
That's an interesting, especially marketing people. I'd be inclined to say, stay in marketing. You've got bigger budgets. It's just marketing cynicism, I suppose. But those are really interesting trends that you report there. And the one about measurement and validation of learning and so on is, in terms of your data, is that kind of vendor driven? Is it a capability or is it actual practice on the ground?
It's a little bit of both. So I think the skills discussion has really started organizations thinking about what could happen if they could measure the abilities or quantify the abilities of individuals. Yeah. And so, for example, we also do a podcast called Workplace Stories, and we talk to leaders who are focusing on skills, trying to figure out skills for their organization. Yes. 3 or 4 years ago, we couldn't find people to be on the podcast because people are like, oh, I don't know, we're not ready to talk about that. Now it's relatively easy to find somebody that's like, yeah, this is how we're quantifying things, and this is what we're doing with the data, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that conversation has changed a little bit, and we're starting to see the just incredible capability we could have as organizations if we could quantify the abilities of people. Right. We can move them around more easily. We know how to personalize learning for them. All kinds of things change when we understand that.
Yeah, there was a conditional in there, if we can. I mean, there has always been a question among kind of cynical stroke wiser heads about the skills thing, which came up a few years ago, that oh yeah, we saw this with competencies, didn't work.
Right.
What do you think the state of play is now with kind of skills and the technology to enable skills?
Yeah. So competencies, I have opinions on competencies, and I have seen some organizations implement skills just like competencies. And I think in cases like that, they will fail. It's just a different name for how we've done competency models for years. Yeah. The thing that I think is different is that it can be at scale, and there's an immediacy to skills that we couldn't have with competency. So competencies were generally measured once a year whenever you had performance reviews. They were used to help you develop, but they didn't give you personalized opportunities for development. Yeah. And because of data and analytics and because of technology, those things can change. If we get the data streams right, we can even use work tech data, somebody working on the front line to help understand, to use that tech data to understand how skilled that person is on that machine.
To be clear, what do you mean by work tech?
It can be anything from Slack and Teams and Word, but it could, for frontline workers, for example, it could be the actual machines that they work on.
Yeah, but integration has been a big part of the story as well.
Absolutely.
Right. And that had proved difficult because, this involved L&D people going down to the hall to IT and having difficult conversations. Is that easing up and getting better?
I think integrations in general are getting easier. It's still very, very difficult. Yeah. L&D needs to speak the tech language and understand what their vendors are capable of, hands down. But we're also seeing the tech vendors start to talk about interoperability. So it's not just L&D that is responsible for it. The actual tech vendors are saying, oh my goodness, we're part of a tech ecosystem and we need to understand how to play with these other people.
Yes. Coming from a learning tech background, working for vendors, there is a tension there. You always know that between, how do we safeguard our IP versus, our customers want us to be joined up with all these other people that we kind of hiss and boo at across the aisle at exhibitions like this, what's winning in that struggle, do you think? Is interoperability really gonna get there, do you think?
I think it is. I've seen some of the larger players who used to have very closed systems start to crack just a little bit and understand that they can't own all the information that can help an organization make decisions. They have to let some of that information in and out in order to do that.
Yeah, and that comes to that question of, the big suites, one ring to rule them all, versus kind of, point solutions and specialist solutions. My next conversation will be with Fosway, who's, split the market into suites and specialists. Does that, presumably that division still holds because you have these behemoths like Cornerstone, gobbled up all the other players still sitting on the market. Does that dynamic change with suites? Do they have to kind of be a bit more open?
I think everybody has to be open. So the individual, I think it will be impossible to survive as an individual tech solution, if you are not opened up. But even the Workdays and the Cornerstones and some of those other big suites are also needing to be open because, for example, tapping into work tech, you've got to be open. They don't have coaching solutions. What if you have a coaching solution? All of those things need to start to integrate in order to share that information. Yeah. It's going to be slow, but I think we're starting to see people understand that the ecosystem is where it is, not necessarily an individual suite.
Marvellous. And where's it going, really, to close out? What can we expect to see more of, do you think, in the next few years?
I think we're going to figure out what to do with AI besides create more content. So.
Well, that'd be
Wouldn't that be marvelous? I think some of the capabilities that we've seen develop in the last couple of years are really, really promising.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is the most promising, though, is the imaginations and the propensities of individual organizations and their leaders to actually change things. Yeah. So I am optimistic. I know we've said this for many times before, L&D is finally going to change. I think we are. I think we're becoming more data-driven. I think we're becoming more part of the organization. Yeah. I think the vendors are somewhat driving us there, but I actually think it's a really good thing.
Yes. You've come to this conference a few times before, I think. How do you rate it? I don't want to give you a 1 out of 10, but does it have a particular character, do you think, that's useful? Or?
I think so. This is actually one of my favorite conferences. Oh. It seems to attract a good number of thinkers. And the vendors are a large part of it. Yeah. But it doesn't feel overly salesy. And I've really appreciated that. I think the thing that attracts me most, though, are those conversations. Like with Egle that you mentioned, we had one over dinner the other night. It was fascinating. And I find myself not having those conversations as much at other conferences.
Yes, well, as I say, many sticks make a fire.
Right.
Just trying to find a closing outline.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, John.
It was great to catch up with the analyst David Perring again, who was the third guest on the Learning Hack and whose consultancy Fosway has recently hired Miles Runham, someone else we've talked to on the podcast a couple of times.
I saw your marvellous session with Miles yesterday, the new lad.
Yeah, Miles was brilliant.
Friend of the podcast.
I love
brilliant.
Always hire people that are better than you is the...
I don't know about that. I'm not going to get involved in that comparison. But yeah, a couple of questions. One I had immediately was, what the hell is a skills graph?
A skills graph?
Yeah.
It's a weird phrase, isn't it? I'm not sure if I'm necessarily a big fan.
Skills taxonomy and skills.
Yeah.
But skills graph.
Skills graph, I'm not necessarily a big fan of the phrase or the word, because I'm a bit last century, and when I think of graphs, I think of lines.
Yes.
So when people say skills graph, I just think, what the hell are you on about? Yeah. But basically what it means is probably the mapping of skills from a skills definition into different domains.
Okay.
So it's that combination, or the connection is probably the way I'd think about it. If you have a skills taxonomy, and then I connect it to a group of individuals to say these individuals have these sorts of skills.
Yes.
And then I map those skills and those individuals to, this is sort of learning that might solve those problems in terms of building those skills.
Yes.
Then the graph is the connection. Now,
right.
Why they couldn't just use the word connection, I don't know. Maybe it's a programming thing.
Yes.
I'm probably not expert enough to understand the root of graph.
That's a really good explanation, because what I was thinking in my head is, is this just another fancy word for skills taxonomy? But obviously it's not.
Yeah, I think it's just a bit more. So it's that connection between the different dimensions of who might be connected to a skill.
Yeah, what you can do.
Yeah.
What other things that might allow you to do within this organisation, or...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or the skills graph might be, so what's happening in other jobs in other organisations.
Yes.
So it's just, I suppose, connecting to another subdomain or another area of understanding.
Right.
It's linked to skills, because skills doesn't live in isolation.
Yeah. So that skills conversation is one we've been having for several years now, going, goes way back if I think of it. And there's been a worry about, will it take off? Is it taking off? How is it working out? And cynical old heads say, and I think you probably know quite a few of them, say it didn't work with competencies, it's not going to work with skills.
Yeah, probably the same language. I remember talking about skills. I think interesting story I was going to talk to on one of the story tacker things that I never quite got around to. And back in the day, 2004, I was with NTL, and we were talking about skills. We were using it in relation to leadership training and getting people to self-assess themselves, get some 360 feedback around themselves.
Yes.
And it sort of worked, right? We were doing it back in the day in what had been docent as a solution. It was very successful. People who went through the leadership program and would talk about their skills and the dimensions of skills that related to leadership, they got a lot out of it. And so back in the day, that would have been 2004, 2005, with a great lady called Hilary Dunstan who made that happen. And it sort of worked then. To me, it just seems a long time, sort of 20 years later, that it's being talked about more.
Yeah.
And it's, I know there are people who are detractors, but really, the things that it's enabling organisations to do, those early adopters, is quite significant, especially around things like talent mobility.
Okay.
And the real angle at the moment, probably less from learning, is more on talent acquisition.
Right.
So how you understand who is a good fit, who is a good match for the work in your organisation.
Yes.
And either hiring them in because they are a good fit, or enabling your existing employees to step into new roles.
Okay.
Is huge. And we've got there are some great case studies out there which tell those stories. Probably the link into skills and learning has probably been a bit more cloudy. It's not necessarily as mature.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that in that conversation about skills and L&D, you a couple of times alluded to the HR technology world as well.
Yeah.
Is that becoming, are HR and L&D becoming closer and linking better together than they did, do you think? Or is it still a bit of a...
I'm not sure if they are linking as much as they should be.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity to collaborate with greater strength and think about the employee experience, right? The lived experience of what does it feel like to move from one HR process to a learning process or to an HR process.
Yeah.
I don't think we've never necessarily sorted that out because we just think in such siloed ways.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting with the roundtables we've been holding here at the event, just that sense of what really was the link between the performance conversation we might have had as sort of employee and manager, and how did that trigger the right learnings because of maybe performance opportunities for me?
Yeah.
And what steering was that given? How was that conversation joined up? And if I did do some learning, how did we follow up, say, even on the progress I've made in delivering my goals?
Yes.
Right? That is still rubbish in lots of places.
Is it a matter of kind of handovers? That, HR deals with things. So, we've got a staff problem here. Yeah. You need some training. Hand over to L&D. And then you're gone. Bye.
And I think that is the key word, right?
Yeah.
It's that handover point.
Yeah.
And I think too often it's a handover gap.
Right.
Because it butts up against each other, but nobody really owns it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we start to fail a little bit more around those areas.
Yeah.
Because, was it a performance? The people who own the performance who didn't get it right? Was it the people in learning who didn't get it right? I don't want to own it if I'm learning, but equally in performance, I don't want to own it either. So I think you end up... And there's a great guy who talked about the things that make organisations successful are the handovers. He was I've forgotten his name. I'm embarrassed myself now by not remembering it.
Yeah.
But he's a French Boston consulting expert, or McKinsey expert, and he just says, successful teams work when the handover, the transition is smooth. So you look at the gaps in the process or between the processes, not the process to fix them.
Yes, that's interesting. I've been doing some work with around podcasting production with people, which is usually a team effort. My podcast, I do it all.
Yeah.
and hence the grey hairs. But within a team, looking at the workflow, it's all about handovers and what happens at this stage, and if it happens smoothly, you can bang them out really quickly. But if there are any snarl-ups in there, then you really need to sort them out.
Yeah, definitely. So I think this sort of break in that continuity between skills and performance and learning and skills. Sometimes it's just that handover. Who had responsibility for it?
Right.
And sometimes I think we over-delegate some of that and don't own it.
Yes. On a completely different topic, I've got a question here that I'm really interested in. So I want to kind of handbrake turn, screech towards that. You talked about the impact of AI, which of course, nobody's talked about AI in these interviews.
Well,
how it commoditizes things, because you get a kind of compression of time and money, cost and time efficiencies with AI, that commoditizes content production in a way. And how that works with the vendor community. I can imagine, there are a lot of worries there, a lot of head scratching about.
So.
I mean, if it drives down the cost, that's nice for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Not so great for the suppliers. If it collapses the time, that's good. Yeah. But do you end up as a creative contact with a very commoditized thing that you can't make a business out of?
Potentially. I think that may be true. And I say that because actually, as a buyer, if I can buy it cheaper, then I'll get beaten up by my CFO if I don't buy it cheaper, right, at the end of the day. So I think it's difficult not to see a world where that commoditization just rolls and rolls.
Yes.
Now, if you're a provider, whether you're a consultant or if you're content generating business, you have to start making decisions then about what you're doing. And we've already spoken to some really interesting providers, one in Italy, for example, and they were saying, well, if we can do our production of e-learning content to the same sort of quality 5 times faster, my commitment to my clients is we will do 5 times as much work for you. Right? So I'll take on 5 times more projects.
Yes.
Now, that's still quite an interesting answer, because does that mean there was 5 times less work floating about?
Yes.
For that provider, they were just thinking, well, on a sort of day rate, sort of cost in, cost out basis, I'm just doing more for you. And isn't that a nice reward for you as an organisation, as a buyer?
That's an optimistic way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be, does that mean 20% less revenues?
Yeah. It could, exactly. Scary. Scary. But if you were, So, and I think that may be part of the reality that we start to get to. And it could, in certain instances, if I'm being really pessimistic, be even worse, because why did I ask you to create a course when ChatGPT can give me a perfectly reasonable 80% accurate answer that was good enough?
And why do you quote it taking you 3 months to produce when those people on that other stand say that have done it in a week?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the economics of that side become really tough if it's just that we were only going to ever reproduce the things that we've always done. And I think back to the days years ago, sort of Epic days, and I used to buy from Epic as a halcyon days. Donald was CEO, and I used to get him into NTL to sell the idea of e-learning back in the day, 1999. And all the model was about, actually, so if you pay this much for face-to-face training, we can do it faster.
And cheaper.
And cheaper, right? Now, the AI is now coming along saying 24 years later, 25 years later, I can do it faster and cheaper.
And Donald is saying it.
Donald's saying it. He's on the money, isn't he, right? So it's difficult. I think it's really tough if you want to stay in that marketplace. Now, what I would say is the flip side of that, and the way I look at it is, actually, what have we been rubbish at doing for the last 24 years, which actually would drive higher value, right? So, yes, the things that we could do maybe more now because of AI is provide higher levels of adaptive learning and personalization.
Yes.
It's the thing that we've been really shit at doing for years and years and years. But if I can start to provide you with more personalized learning, actually that's a big tick in the box.
Yes.
And I think from my point of view, the way I look at this is we need to change that conversation, a bit like the early days free learning.
Yeah.
Not that it's about the cost of production,
Yeah.
but it's the cost of consumption. And I genuinely think that if we can start to talk to our businesses that, do you know what, I can give you the same old learning at a fifth of the price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want that? They'll say yes. And I'll still say it's going to cost us 5 million for our people to go through it because we've got 20,000 people. It's going to take them this much time.
Yeah.
If I can say to my business owners, I'm going to spend actually twice as much as we used to spend. I'm not going to spend 50k, I'm going to spend 100k on the learning program. But because it's going to be much more personalized and targeted, we're only going to cost us, I don't know, 2 million to go through. The business case stands up, right, for spending more because the business impact is less.
Right.
So I think we need to change the point of inflection to enable us to do better things with the AI rather than the same old stuff that wasn't necessarily cutting it.
And I think you were kind of saying that, in a world where content production is really commoditized, your only way to differentiate is through things like adaptive learning. Was that?
I think so. I think it's about the scenario-based learning, where you get closer to enabling people to say, actually, I'm really ready to do this. And that's not only do I believe that and feel it because I've gone through that scenario, for example, in a virtual place and gone through the toughest, most difficult questions in that scenario and survived. So not only am I ready as an individual, but actually the business knows that actually I'm low risk. I'm not going to cause a problem. I can do this efficiently. And that's where again, it's translating it into business outcomes rather than learning cost.
Okay. And I mean, you'll know as well as I do that adaptive learning is something that we've been talking to, and I've been talking to adaptive learning providers, and you know the names and so on. Come back year after year, it hasn't grown that much. Do you think we're suddenly one of these years going to come to this show and wow, adaptive learning's taken off?
I hope so.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure if it will. Do you know?
What's holding it back, do you think?
I think traditionally it was the cost.
Yeah.
And that's where maybe AI will be the key that unlocks the door a little bit.
Because you can bring down costs.
Because the automation can start to speed up the process. So fifth of the cost, that sounds accessible in a way it wasn't before. Maybe the expectations, we've been able to sit around and say, actually, it was sort of good enough what we did.
Yeah.
If we don't change that attitude, I'm a bit pessimistic that actually we'll embrace it. But I think that I don't know. It's I'd love to, the optimist in me says it's the only way that we survive as a digital learning future.
Yes.
The pessimist in me says it becomes e-learning becomes so commoditized that I don't even invest in doing good stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll land a little bit in the middle.
Optimism has been the kind of keynote of the show for me. I mean, Dani Johnson's Red Threads, her presentation gave lots of reasons in the data to feel very optimistic about it. So I think maybe we're on the side of optimism.
Yeah.
Just to close out now, I've noticed you on the stand there, you're talking to people, you're giving a kind of e-learning clinic, or maybe sort of Santa's Cave. What do you want for Christmas, young fella?
Yeah.
What sort of questions are you having? What sort of conversations have you been having on the stand, and what's really stood out for you from what
I think some of the most interesting things are the challenges people are now having with their learning ecosystem in terms of its tech stack. So what elements I'm now plugging together to try and create create a next-gen or effective learning experience. So
interoperability, integration.
Yeah. But just even what's involved in layers that even aren't stacked together. So if I'm doing simulations, what am I using, and how does that connect into my LMS? And actually, if I've got an LSP that I'm using within the LMS, how does that work? And actually, if I'm now using the AI with skills, and we're using a talent mobility platform, which is now making recommendations for the jobs that David and John might be doing, and then recommending learning, how does that fit into all the things I've said before? And then when I've tried to create a skills architecture, did I use AI to create the architecture? Did we do it manually? Did we then do something different? And how do we plug it into all the other HR bits that were connected to skills? And people are going, I'm not sure what to do. And I think it's in a world of complexity, you're trying to help people understand sort of what is the art of the possible, but also what is the art of the sensible when there's so many pressures and so many pulls and so much to manage.
Okay. David, thank you very much for your demonstration of the art of the possible and the art of the simple.
I'm sure it wasn't simple, it wasn't possible.
Lovely to talk to you, and we get to talk again loads in the future.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, John.
The conference at Learning Technologies is far too big for one mere podcaster to get around all the sessions, so I called on an old friend of yours and mine, Caroline Ford, now Learning and Talent Director at AstraZeneca, to assist in summing it up. And helpfully, Caroline also managed to give it a theme.
I think for me there was a key theme through this. Almost every session I saw had somebody saying it, fall in love with the problem. That for me was a real key theme all the way through this. And that understand what you're solving for here. Don't just go ahead and implement technology because it's a shiny new toy. Think about what problem you're solving for, fall in love with the problem, go deep with the problem, unpack it, unpick it, and then work with the business to think about what that solution might look and feel like.
Okay. It's great that we've got a theme. So I'm here with Caroline Ford, who's going to do a wrap-up for us of the conference. She went to all the sessions, I didn't, so she probably knows more than I did, because I was too busy trying to get interviews with people. And we're going to kind of compare notes. And it's the end of the conference, and you see before you the wreckage of a podcaster. in my case, we've had a glass of wine, just the one, and we'll soon have to pack up and go. But we'll see if we can kind of draw together the threads and say something vaguely meaningful. I'm sure you'll do better than I would at that, Caroline. So what were your impressions of the conference? Tell us, highlights.
This conference never disappoints, right? It's a surprise and delight always for me. There's always something new. It's slick. It's like a well-oiled machine. Yes. Don's got this one nailed, hasn't he?
Absolutely. So it's good the sponsors heard that. The rest might not all be so positive. Yes, it will. Yes, it will, folks. Yeah, carry on.
So one of the highlights for me, let's start at the beginning.
Right.
So I think the opening address from Don was brilliant, always is. But Daniel Susskind, author, multi-author, his father was one of the Wave 1 pioneers of AI, which is so prevalent in every presentation that we saw really this year. That was a big pull through, the red thread all the way through this. And of course, the other red thread was
Dani Johnson.
Absolutely.
But it is interesting, that story of Daniel Susskind and his father. That was, I think, for me, was one of the most interesting things in the presentation. Was that lineage, and people have said to me before that you think he's interesting, you should find out about the father.
I almost feel like there's a few people at the moment that I'm seeing who are really prevalent, but who've almost been dandled on the knee of their parent and immersed in a home environment which has really given them that deep knowledge and learning and interest from the parent and the parent's friends and social circle in the topic that they have themselves now since become expert in. And I think Daniel's a really good example of that. And he had some really interesting themes here. He said everyone thinks blue-collar workers are going to be affected by AI, but white-collar are immune from this.
Really
But
interesting.
yeah, but
White-collar thing.
yeah, and he said, you know, the white-collar workers are absolutely not immune from this. They will be affected by AI. And there was a real sort of key theme from him around doing more with less human resource. He talked a lot about blue-collar workers and the AI implications for them. They are associated with doing routine tasks, where white-collar workers are more associated with non-routine tasks. But he did some really deep thinking and explanation on how non-routine tasks are just as susceptible now to the application of AI as the routine tasks. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And of course, you know, this is a terrible shock for the middle classes, for the professional classes, to know that they're going to go the same way as the mill workers and the agricultural workers and all the rest of it. You mean they're coming for us?
Well, so it would seem. He even said that theologians and religion wasn't immune from the forces and influences of AI. One of my favourite examples, John, the Vatican, the Catholic Church.
Well, as an ex-Catholic, I objected strongly to these sniggers about the confession app.
I thought the confession app was genius. You know, the fact that the Catholic Church has created an AI-driven app to help you prepare for confession with a drop-down list to help you prompt for ideas on contrition. How brilliant is that? Genius.
Yes, I mean, we are, you know, there is a worry here that this is kind of a bit of disintermediation. Because I can remember, you know, as a kid, you had a little booklet to prepare for your confession. You'd go and sit there and I think, oh, what are my sins? And, you know, I was so young at the time, I had no sins. I was looking forward to having sins.
Have you got sins now, John? No, you don't have to answer that question.
Not on camera.
No.
Yes, and, less and less as the years go on, sadly.
I know.
But there was a kind of suggestion that rather than just being a kind of prompt for before the event of going into confession, it's actually becoming a replacement, an automation. Yeah. And the thing would, you know, you would kind of type in, I committed the sin of drinking too much on a Friday night and swearing too loudly in the pub, and it would kind of come back with, all right, three Our Fathers to your Hail Marys.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, you know, who needs a priest? It's been disintermediated.
Well, that's what the Vatican was worried about. You know, they were keen to come back and say, it's not a replacement, by the way. You know, and herein lies the challenge and the worry for people that, you know, if the app is so good, if the AI is so good, is there a need for the human in these situations, which are very, very human-centric? You know, religion's so human-centred, right?
Yeah, I might have worried about that before I started working with ChatGPT, you know. But having worked with it quite a bit now, I feel like saying to it, you're incredibly useful.
Yeah.
But you're a bit stupid. You know, you still need the humans there, and you know, to kind of localise it into a conversational tone which is not of the west coast of America, and also that just can tell when something just sounds a bit clunky and stupid.
And has decent reference points.
Absolutely.
As well.
That they haven't made up. Yeah, okay.
Something more trustworthy. Yeah. I think one of my favourite things, you know, probably just to finish up on Susskind's presentation, was that he said cited some really interesting research, which was that only 5% of jobs could be fully automated. Yeah. But that 60% of jobs had more than 30% of tasks within them, which
Yes.
can be.
Yeah. Pause the tape now and sort of jot those numbers down and then
Yeah.
think about it. Because if you're innumerate like I am,
Yeah.
but that is really, really interesting. That even if it's not a case of jobs go, tasks get
Yeah.
easier to do, there is still, we only need 3 people in the marketing department rather than 5, and that's 2 people on the dole.
And I think his closing message was, training is the answer, which is really interesting. And to swap training at the start of life, or thinking about training just at the start of life or a start of life activity, and think about it as a lifelong activity, retain and improve the ability, the flexibility to learn and retain and retrain information on a constant basis.
Yeah. Okay. So we've used up quite a bit of time already, and we've done one presentation.
We can speed up, John.
We're going to speed up.
Okay.
So what were some other highlights?
So I really wanted to focus this year on our women in learning. Unashamedly, I'm going in there to fly the flag for the ladies this year. So my favourite presenter at these things, the one that I think is a real champion on women in learning, is Sharon Claffey-Kalubli. I absolutely love her. She does never disappoint for me. This year, she pulled out a few key points where she thinks women are underrepresented, or there is a potential challenge or issue with the way they've been represented. The Oscars, Barbie, shocking.
That was a shock, wasn't
Absolutely.
it? Absolute shock. I thought that was such a great film.
Oh, absolutely brilliant film.
Marvelous and so funny.
Oh, she was brilliant. But why did Ken present at the Oscars? And why did Barbie get paid the same as Ken when it was really her show?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, female star, female director, female producer, very much a kind of female project. And then there is, the admittedly great Ryan Gosling singing the song at the Oscars. It was a very obvious kind of 2 fingers up to the feminist movement, I felt.
Wasn't it?
And then they threw everything at Oppenheimer. A story about scientists killing people in large numbers.
I know. Did you do Barbieheimer? Did you do Barbie and then Oppenheimer?
No, I did Barbie and nothing else. I haven't even seen Oppenheimer. I'd love to see it, and I think Killer Murphy is great, and I'm sure it's a great film. But I've got to wait for it to come out on streaming because I'm a cheapskate.
Well, moving back to Sharon and her fabulous presentation, she had some really great female guests. She always does. Alice Thompson did a fabulous summary about how she had moved from worrier to warrior.
I like that.
She said 1 in 10 men, when they're surveyed, say they would class themselves as a warrior, but 1 in 5 women would say that they do worry. And her mantra is, it's okay, they're okay, we're okay. Good is okay. It doesn't have to be perfect, ladies. So that's one to take away for sure. Because we do worry, I think.
Well, I think men get married so that somebody else can do their worrying for them.
Absolutely. That magic coffee table, do you know the one? No. And then Catherine McGraw-Pratt, again, really good summary. She had to step back from her high-powered career and eventually ramped back up to it. Her husband had motor neurone disease. She stepped back. She focused on being a carer, a wife and a mother. And then when she went back into the workplace, she found that she had some confidence challenges. But she did some really nice tips and tricks to help you rebrand and recover from the type of experience that many women do have in the workplace. So that was really good.
Yeah. I'm really sorry that I missed this session. I didn't fall down on my allyship. It's just that we had to cover the whole conference. And
I know.
And you were doing that one.
And what were some of the men doing, John, that you went to see? Because you focused a lot on, you focused on all
sport,
sorts. They weren't.
And bands and, the men. Well, I've covered everything that I saw pretty thoroughly in the rest of this broadcast. So I think we should kind of carry on And just you can sum up the stuff that I didn't get to that hasn't had so much oxygen.
Absolutely. So I think another one for me was the L&D strategy and operational excellence session that I saw. That had Sally Ann Bartlett from Rubrics, and it had Pash Reddy from KPMG. The message here on this one was really around, the rubrics one was speed versus perfection, something that I know many of us do struggle with a bit. You know, we really want a grade A platinum plated delivery for our learning and development. But here is a lady who was part of a team of one. She was working with a limited budget and she had inherited technology and yet created an absolutely phenomenal piece of learning experience through an LXP for rubrics, which has had really fantastic feedback.
Pash. Just by the by, one does hear of phenomenal learning departments who create things with very small teams. Which I won't go into that moment because it's just gossip, what I'm thinking of. But no, carry on.
Oh, I love a bit of gossip. Are you sure you don't want to share that?
This is a person who is a European. He's the head of learning for one of the most valuable countries in Europe, outside of America, and has a learning team of 3 and does amazing stuff.
No budget as well, I bet.
No, well, I don't know about the budget. They've got a lot of money, so maybe it's got budget. But you'd imagine it's very scalable, it's very digital, it's, smart guy.
I think it's amazing what you can do with a small team. The more I've worked in the later years of my career, the smaller the teams have got, the bigger the job title gets, but the smaller the teams often, and you do have to work in partnership a lot more. And be very creative with budget. So that resonates definitely.
Is this a matter of a thing of technology kind of meaning less people employed and you can leverage it more through digital?
I think so, definitely. That and the partnership piece, the learning ecosystem. And that came out actually in a lot of the sessions that I saw, was this small in-house team, or even a team of 1 with a reasonable budget, but needing to work with a partner. And I think that was some of the messaging from Pash Reddy with KPMG. She had to use, again, it was existing technologies. Something else that was a key theme on a lot of these was, as I said at the beginning, really fall in love with the problem, but then do lots and lots of research within your organisation and understand what matters to the business and really, really understand the pain points that your business has around the skill set they have today, the skill set they need for tomorrow, the learning technologies they've got access to right now, and what a great learning experience would look and feel like for them. And Pash did some really great work. She created some personalised, actionable, contextualised and integrated learning and communicated the hell out of it, really. Great campaign, great video. She actually blew her budget on a really good promotional video and just rinsed it over and over and over. Every manager was given this video. The video was used to promote, and she's got great results through that comms and engagement plan.
Such a good story.
Yep, absolutely.
I say we're running a bit long, and it's the end of the conference, so all the equipment is running out of memory and battery and all the rest of it. We're going to carry on till it all stops. So if there's an abrupt ending, you'll know why.
You'll know why, absolutely.
It's gold, there's so much in this conference.
Isn't it?
Get in.
So one of the things that I loved was the session on skills infrastructure. I'm a bit passionate about skills and skills-based organisations. Absolutely, So I saw a fabulous panel interview between Peter Shepherd from Ericsson, Laurie Niles-Hoffman from Learning Strategy, and Teresa Road, Director of Consult, Her Limited, along with Gordon Ritchie.
Podcast episode, Teresa Road.
She is fabulous. We love Teresa. And really, I think all 3 of those really were talking about the ability to use skills intelligence. I think Peter's got some really good stories to tell around. He works with TechWolf, one of my preferred organisations. I love them. I think they do some great work, and they update their skills taxonomy monthly. They talk about having a skill sensing network. And I think Peter's message was very much around, it's not just about the technology, it's about really understanding the business, and back to that theme of what's the problem that you're looking to solve. He talked about doing pilots, lots of small pilots, thinking about where you've got a pain point and then using skills and skills-based technology to try and unpack and unpick that. So interesting there.
And we had some doubts about skills. I had an interesting conversation with David Perring about that, but it does seem to be working out. There was a lot of doubt about it.
I think that the skills technology marketplace and the vendors are really consolidating.
Yeah.
I've heard quite a lot of noise around, is this actually going to deliver what it promises?
Yeah.
Is it just another version of competency frameworks with a fancy new title and a bit of technology that sits behind it? But I'm with you that the messaging that I heard was the pendulum is definitely swinging back into the positive camp. I think there is some early and encouraging signs that this is actually working and beginning to bear fruit, but it's got to mature, John. It's still early days.
Well, I think what I'm hearing, if I'm getting this right, is that in terms of practice, what people are doing, it's proving really useful. In terms of technology, maybe there are some problems with it. It hasn't always delivered everything it promised, and also a lack of interoperability. That's a difficult word to say, folks. Interoperability.
He's had a glass of wine as well.
Yeah, two. We had to, because security stopped us bringing them into the interview suite.
I thought that was rude,
Rude.
I know.
We had to down them very quickly.
Yeah.
So I'll say it again. Interoperability.
Well done.
There's a lack of it. And, people want to safeguard their IP. I mean, understandably, I suppose. But what the buyers are crying out for is integration and interoperability now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff has to work together.
And a skills strategy. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And something I thought worked really well in this session, actually, they had these little thumbs up, thumbs down paddles for everyone in there. And they asked a series of questions, which were really great prompters for the debate and discussion to say, here's a question, do you agree? Do you disagree? And people could just put the paddle up. So it's interactivity without being threatening interactivity.
Yeah,
I
a bit
think,
problematical for massive wafflers like me, like say, but on the other hand, but
sitting on the fence.
It's good to be able to. It's very democratic.
Yeah, I just think it's good to get a litmus test,
Yes, absolutely.
So that was really interesting session. So let's move on. Systems implementation today, absolutely great session. Although I did get some feedback from one of the younger participants who maybe is a little bit more at the beginning of the career and was going to this to really learn about, I suppose, the roadmap and the steps to success, maybe the stages of systems implementation from beginning to end. And she did say that she was a little bit disappointed that a couple of the presenters had just talked about a new launch of an LXP or something like that, as opposed to the nuts and bolts of the systems implementation. However, she did like the presentation from Carla Quiring, and Carla actually works at AstraZeneca, has done a 4-year systems implementation with Mark Howells, the SVP of talent and learning. And so this is a really interesting one. A friend of the podcast, absolutely. But Carla's journey is really interesting because AstraZeneca is a huge organisation, and they often talk about the fact they had legacy systems, about 70 actually legacy learning management systems. And
wow. 70
legacy
LMSs.
Absolutely. And Carla said, when you're doing something at an enterprise level, you've really got to work so hard with the business. There are many, many stakeholders. You have to engage with them, take them on the journey with you. And it's not simple, and it's not a short journey to do that, so that you can get a system implementation or a systems tech stack, really, of multiple systems that will work together, but which have to serve multiple languages, multiple different areas of the business, and do that well before you retire off the things that people have spent time, money, and effort individually on building.
Yeah. What's up next?
Oh, let's have a look. So I think the last one for me was a really nice session on change management. So this one was a bit of a surprise and delight for me. I saved it till the end of the day today, being Thursday. Yeah. And I think we saw 3 different presenters, each of which were able to bring something unique and interesting to the presentation. So Saskia van den Berg-Tromp, Paul Ferguson and Nikki Finnegan. So we started with Saskia. She talked about change having never been this fast, but that it will never be this slow again, something she said both Brandon and Laura Overton had talked about in their sessions earlier in the conference. She said a couple of really good tips when you are looking at fast-paced change and implementations. Keep your people close, consistency is key, help leaders tell the story, and we need to remember the times when things are unexpected, because it's those unexpected times that people remember during change. So celebrate and have fun when those happen. Right. So Nikki Ferguson worked for SJP. She talked a lot about implementation of VR and a new LXP. I liked what Vicky said. It wasn't the standout of the 3 for me. Yeah. The standout was Paul Ferguson. Paul works for the government. He's a civil servant, which I really like, because often we talk a lot about big corporate businesses that have a lot of money. Yes. And I think, not-for-profit and local government, etc., they don't have those sorts of budget, and they often find change a bit more difficult, I think.
Yeah, if you spool back to the beginnings of this conference, like the early years of, the kind of the noughties, it was very different. The public sector had a big presence because they were spending, because they had money. And then, financial crash, austerity, they just disappeared from the landscape as far as kind of like vendor accounts were concerned. They weren't spending. So the corporates really took over in terms of driving things forward. But the public sector were doing some really interesting things.
I think in this instance, Paul and his team have done that. He had couple of slides, only a couple, but they had a couple of really nice models on them, some of which many of us will be familiar with. He conscribes to be a change practitioner in a methodology called PROSCI. So that's PROSCI for those of you wanting to look it up. PROSCI. And he overlaid... He does, Adamski. He's showing your age now. Yeah. And he overlaid it with the classic kind of change curve as well. He talked about there being 3 critical stages in any change project or implementation, whether it's learning or something else. Yes. The current state, the transition state, and then the future state that you're aiming to achieve. Yeah. And 3 key takeaways for him on that change curve were that there are 3 change curves in any business change implementation. He said your leaders go first. Right. They have the first of the change curves. Okay. Then it drops down to managers who have to really be custodians of the leader's decision to change. Yes. So they go second, and they are critical to the success of the change, because the third group is the everyone else. Yes. And the managers know the everyone else really well. So if there's a problem with the everyone else, the managers have got their finger on the pulse, and then they can pass the message back to the leaders. This does sound very
stratified. Is this, aren't organisations supposed to be flatter?
Well, in theory. And there wasn't a great deal of difference between those layers of the change curve with the leaders, the managers, and the everyone else.
Just they happen at different time. The top team gets the news first and then passes it down.
Absolutely. And the rest of us have to adopt.
I mean, you've probably read your Cotter Who's the big person on change management in the literature? I only know this because we've been covering it in Great Minds on Learning Under Leadership.
Yeah.
Cotter was the big person of how you do change. You gather your
7
coalition
steps
and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Is this a completely different model for that, or does it seem to draw from it?
No, it wasn't a completely different model from that, but I thought that the way Paul presented it was simple, straightforward.
It does sound very simple and understandable.
Not complicated, although change is, of course, as we all know, complex, complicated.
And it's about dealing with complexity, isn't it?
It's about dealing with emotion as much as anything as well. And he really talked a lot about that third stage, that future state, and not having people pull back into current state because it's too hard, they don't believe it, and it's not working for them.
Oh, right. Okay. So the curve isn't just going to happen. You've got to stop people sliding down.
It can go round and round, yeah, absolutely. So
okay.
I thought that was a really nice session to finish on for me, John.
Okay. Fascinating. So that's your lot. That's amazing roundup, Caroline. Any things that you feel could do better?
Honestly, with this Learning Technologies conference, it's one of my favourite. I like to come. I like to meet up with my compadres every year. But if I had to say one thing that I think maybe could be different next year, would be my ask that we have a swap around maybe of some of the presenters. I think I've seen many of them many times now, and although there was a good rotation of particularly fresh business perspectives that I saw come in the panels where we had a three-way, I'd like to see some of the regulars maybe rotate so that they're regulars every 2 to 3 years rather than every year. That would be my only piece if I had to give Don a wish list, that would be what's on it.
Yes. I think one of the great things is the 30 under 30.
Oh,
so it's like, here are the new people, fresh blood. And it's always interesting because they bring a different perspective. Also, one session I found really interesting, although it wasn't massively well attended, was Andy Wooler's about Ukraine, which I
loved this one.
So I went along there because of that. But what I was startled by, not so much startled, but really enthused by, was you had people from all different parts of Europe. You had people from Hungary. You had people who taught, families who'd emigrated to Britain and were kind of living with host families and so on. But you had unusual perspectives, and they were younger and more diverse in terms of where they came from in Europe, and this increasingly this industry to me just seems increasingly European. It used to be, if I go back to the very old days, it was like we all knew that like e-learning was happening big in America, it's happening big in the UK, and okay, the French were doing some stuff and the Germans were doing some stuff, but basically the UK show is the most important because it's the most important thing. That is a completely different picture now, I think. It's nothing to do with Brexit, it's to do with how the thing has developed worldwide, really, and Europe-wide. And it is just great to hear those voices from outside of what we know and, what we're used to seeing every year.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I love that. Absolutely love it. And I love your thinking on the 30 under 30 as well. It'd be nice to see some of them up on the stage. That would be good, if possibly terrifying for them, but excellent for us, just to see some of the new young ideas coming out as well.
Yeah. Learning Technologies Got Talent.
Oh, I love that. Learning Technologies Got Talent. It's the future, definitely.
Yeah. And we could be like Ant and Dec, introducing it.
We could, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Doing our annual review of that and introducing them all. Definitely, I love it.
Yeah, and I could do all those kind of amazed expressions when the person comes on and you think, this person isn't anything. And then they do something amazing, like a backflip, standing backflip, and you go...
The L&D backflip.
Yeah, so I've watched all those TV programmes. Sorry, this is getting a bit UK specific, folks. and I think we probably need to go back to the bar. So thank you very much for that amazing wrap up, Caroline. Yeah,
Always a pleasure, John. Same time next year.
Same time. Well, ask us.
We've got the banner now.
Yes. Well, I'd definitely be along if we can, because it's just been a blast.
Absolutely. Love it.
Bye.
Thank you, John.
Last but very much not least of my chats about this year's event is with the chair of the conference himself, the irrepressible Don Taylor. Don, some time has passed since the show. The dust has settled a bit. What were your highlights from the event?
It sounds a bit weird, but the highlight for me was getting people together 1 year on from an event which had seemed so transformational and extraordinary last year, and finding that everyone was a little bit saner and calmer, but still really excited. So last year, it was all about learning technology equals AI. And when you're running an event, you have to be very careful, because the program goes out 3-4 months in advance. You have to be very careful at pitching at the right level, which I think we did last year. But inevitably, everything was still new as far as a lot of people in L&D were concerned around artificial intelligence. And there wasn't enough substantial stuff to go on to present a good story around how AI was being used. This year it was different. This year we're able to say, look, AI is still really important. It's one of the hugely important tools we're using. We can talk about how it's being used, and it became much less the lead story, although it was in a couple of sessions, and much more the enabler of what people were doing, which is how it should be. And that, I think, will be continued next year. So it was great to have people together having rational discussions around this stuff that we call AI, which is a jumble of, it's a very loosely used term, but it's a jumble of stuff around data processing and algorithms, which is coming to be super important, rightly, for learning and development.
And was there anything that caused you to think differently about the future of L&D this year? In which case, who or what was it?
I'm not sure that I'm necessarily thinking differently about it, but it might be that a couple of people confirmed my suspicions that I already had. After all, I put the program together. So if I put the program together and then I'm surprised by something, probably there's something wrong. But if you like, my prejudices were confirmed in a couple of areas. So, and we had great speakers. I'm picking people out here, not because other people didn't do a good job, but only because I think these were some salient points for me. So there was the power of conversation bit, which was Emily Cosgrove and Sarah Hope. I thought that was really interesting as a way of talking about how informal learning, to use that generic term from probably 2006, informal learning is something that is an increasingly important part of what we do. It's always important, but it's increasingly important now, I think. How do we harness that? And that was echoed in other sessions. So there was a great session about community and collaboration with Kinga Petrovai and Lynn Rogers talking about that. And I think I started talking about AI, but actually I think how we get people to talk together and share things effectively is as important, because AI deals with stuff that is surfaced, but so much of what we deal with in the workplace isn't surfaced. It's tacit knowledge in people's heads. So getting that stuff to the surface through the power of conversation, I think, is crucially important. And the other thing tying up with those things was the data storytelling bit, which was a combination of Zlotola and Hadia Nuruddin talking about how you are literate with data and tell stories with it. And then one step beyond that was organizational network analysis with the marvelously named Starling David Hunter III, who you might guess is American, although he lives in Sweden, which goes a step beyond dealing just with data and saying, look, one key thing we can use AI and algorithms for is to understand how the data around how people are associated in an organization. For me, these things all fit together. If we can understand how people interact and network together in an organization, and we can then use smart ways of surfacing their tacit knowledge, and we can then use probably AI tools to share that more effectively, we're looking at a very different sort of learning and development in the future to what we had when I started, which was you share information through courses or through books, and that's it.
With your wide experience of industry events internationally, you chair several conferences in other countries and so on. How would you assess London's standing now as a centre for innovation in L&D? You know, what's behind that question is kind of, I go back away with this, as do you. When I first started going to the show 25 years ago, it was a village. You know, the industry was a small village. There just weren't that many of us. And the joke was that if you dropped a bomb on the Hand and Flower, the pub over the road from Olympia, you'd wipe out the British e-learning industry. And then it grew very rapidly. And I think we probably reached a point somewhere around the kind of 2010s where there was the US where a lot was happening. There was the UK where more was happening in the rest of Europe. And those were kind of the two centres for e-learning, for learning technologies, or so it seemed at the time. Has that changed now? There just seems to be a lot more going on in Europe than there was if you go back that far.
I wouldn't want to say that one is winning at the expense of another. I think what's happened is the overall growth of the market for educational technology in the workplace has expanded generally. And I like the fact that we see things like EdTech Station in Belgium, the strong network of startups in our field in Sweden, both Berlin and Munich being centers for EdTech startups. So there's a lot happening in different parts of Europe and indeed elsewhere in the world, but in Europe. But I don't think that necessarily means that the British EdTech and learning technology scene is smaller than it has been. I read a stat the other day, since 2023, 185 learning technology startups in Europe, including UK, have gone through to pre-seed or seed funding. And that is a substantial proportion of the total number of startups that have done that. And the marketplace is estimated to be growing from about $40 billion at the moment to something like $79 billion by 2030 internationally. So this is a growing thing. And you're absolutely right. In the year 2000, the very term learning technology show was chosen ambiguously, because if you remember all that time ago, it was both the technology used for learning and it was learning about technology. It was still a very strong theme, but this was learning how to use Windows products and networking tools from Microsoft. It's a very different world now. And that growth that I've just described is going to keep going. I don't think necessarily UK is a smaller part of it. I think everything has grown. And I like the fact that we've got such a strong representation of it in Europe. This was the first year that Learning Technologies had over half of its participants at the conference come from outside the UK. And most of those were coming from Europe. So it suggests that
quite a lot from Holland.
Yes, there's always a strong Netherlands contingent.
Yeah.
But it does suggest that things are going well generally in Europe. I don't think necessarily means that UK is failing. I don't know.
Yeah, no. So London still an important centre. So we'll still keep coming back to this lovely, commodious shed in Docklands.
Shed. It's a hangar, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't have the warmth of Olympia, and I loved Olympia had that beautiful theatre.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, every event is determined by its environment, and the environment is that hangar-like building. which means that you can do a variety of things with it, whereas at Olympia there were a lot of things you couldn't do, which is why we had to move across town.
Well, we look forward to seeing what you'll do with it in years to come. Thank you very much, Don.
Great to have you here. Great to be here, John.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors.
The Learning Hack is among the top 5% most listened to podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes, we found out. But it depends for its existence solely on sponsorship and your Patreon contributions. If you want us to continue holding these excellent conversations about learning, it's you who said they're excellent, not us. Let's have a chat about your company sponsoring. Or sign up to patreon.com/learninghack, and for a piddlingly small amount of money, get transcripts, text summaries, and early access. Keep us alive. Until next time.
Stay classy, learning people.
Now I finally get it.